BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Alright, hello everybody, and welcome to this special weekend presentation of Black Box Online Radio. And this is going to be the first episode in a multi-part series that is going to be covering the death of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996, perhaps one of the most famous murder cases in not only the last 30 years, but in all of American history. About a year ago on the channel, I did an episode where I was responding to some comments that were made by a close follower of this program named Tina L. That's the name she uses in the YouTube comments section, and she asked me a particular question. If you could read any book about the JonBenet Ramsey case, which one would it be? And hands down, 100%, I said, Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular, because this is a story that I think Stephen Singular can not only tell, but I think that he's going to have a lot of ideas that are insightful, and it's about curiosity and exploration. And I'm almost certain that I will not agree with everything that he's saying, but sometimes it's that type of insight that allows you to connect dots in a different way. Maybe somebody's going down the right track, but there are a few deviations, or maybe they're expressing an idea that can be reshaped in a different way, or perhaps they're going to be ideas that you just want to disagree with altogether. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the weekends now, and thank you to everybody who listened to the most recent weekend series on the Zodiac Killer Moraga connection, and as always, you can like and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions. But the subtitle of the book, Presumed Guilty, is An Investigation into the JonBenet Ramsey Case, the Media, and the Culture of Pornography. And the reason why I wanted to read this book out of all other books on JonBenet is somewhat of a personal reason, somewhat of a reason of curiosity, as I said, but the truth is that I first learned about Stephen Singular back in 2019. Again, one of you guys in the comments section recommended that I check out his interviews that he had done. He was a regular guest on the show Porkins Policy Radio, which was available here on YouTube for free, and I became a regular listener to that program. And he is the guy, who talks very frequently about how O.J. Simpson was innocent. And before you're trying to respond to anything about that, I mean, I really want this to stay more focused on JonBenet Ramsey, but that's why I started listening to this guy. I was just curious what he had to say about this and listening to all of his different points. And I talked about this in some of the older Black Box recordings from 2019, where I actually ended up disagreeing with a lot of his observations on O.J. Simpson. From then, I found that he had written a book about the JonBenet Ramsey case called Presumed Guilty, and I thought that his theory about JonBenet was very interesting because it was a little bit different. It's something that you only really see maybe on forums or threads or the far-off corner of the internet where you're just reading some type of blog with a black background and then neon blue or neon green letters, very bright colors for the fonts on a very dark colored background, those type of things where they're sharing ideas, where they claim that they've obtained this info, but they don't say how they obtained the info. And I'm going to read the book and share things right alongside with you. So, to tell you my original understandings of Stephen Singular's claims about JonBenet Ramsey, it would be that, number one, JonBenet Ramsey was murdered in 1996, and her death was the result of activities that were run by a California, no, absolutely not, Colorado, excuse me, I'm thinking about the Zodiac case. Her death was the result of activities run by a Colorado pedophile ring, where this happened to other girls. The way that JonBenet was murdered, the way that she was handled, this happened to other girls in Colorado, and it was the result of a pedophile ring that also involved high-ranking members of what some people would call elite circles. I mean, that's a subjective and relative term, but this could have even involved executives from Lockheed Martin, and JonBenet Ramsey's father, John Ramsey, certainly had connections to Lockheed Martin, and we'll see that. And the second theory that I think is worth exploring in this new series is that could the death of JonBenet Ramsey have been the result of making a type of pornographic film? And this goes way beyond Stephen Singular, because this has been talked about in several different circles about even milder and tamer theories than what Stephen Singular has proposed, talking about how there was a paintbrush that was used in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. It was actually broken and tied into a garrote. The garrote was placed around her neck, and she was strangled. And the head of the paintbrush is thought to have been inserted into her body, well, into her vaginal area. Absolutely disgusting even to say it out loud, but they believe that JonBenet Ramsey was sexually assaulted around the time of her murder. And was this something that was filmed because, again, of a pornographic issue? And that will be something else that I will be exploring. And I want to be 100% clear. Those are the two theories that have been shared online. And my reiteration of what Stephen Singular will say might change as I read through his book. That's from listening to a couple interviews that he did online that have been shared on YouTube. Will my understanding of his theory about JonBenet evolve, or will I have to say, hey, now wait a second, okay, this was my initial assumption about what he was saying, it turns out it's incorrect? And I think that this will be a very interesting mental exercise. And more importantly, focusing on the word insight. Is there some way, somehow, going to be a way that even someone beyond me, one of you guys in the comment section, will connect the dots in a particular way? Now let's get an introduction onto the story of JonBenet Ramsey. And this, again, is written by Stephen Singular, and it is written right at the beginning. On the morning of December 26, 1996, JonBenet Ramsey was found murdered in the basement of her parents' multi-million-dollar house in Boulder, Colorado. The death of the 6-year-old beauty queen horrified the city's residents and immediately captured the nation's interest. As throngs of reporters and media crews swarmed into Boulder, local and national networks flashed images of JonBenet dressed provocatively in pageant regalia across the country and overseas. Concurring with the opinions expressed on television and radio talk show programs, Boulder's police department focused their attention on two suspects, John and Patsy Ramsey. JonBenet's parents, despite pressure from the police to arrest the Ramseys, the district attorney's office attempted to establish new leads and identify other suspects, but without the support of law enforcement, authorities and the DA's office were stifled. As the investigation came to a standstill, one looked deeper, not content to pass judgment on the Ramseys without conclusive evidence and convinced that there was a reason for the legal system's wariness in prosecuting the case. Denver-based journalist Stephen Singular followed a trail from the local bars to the county jail to answer the question, who or what killed JonBenet Ramsey? And this is going to be, I think, a very good take on the subject, because I always appreciate outside-the-box thinking. I appreciate the way that someone is going to say, okay, the media is trying to present this particular story, but I don't think that they're telling the truth. And no matter what, forget insight, forget examinations, forget anything to do with reshaping ideas. Here is something that I want to present to you as a cold, hard fact. The media absolutely destroyed the general public's understanding of the JonBenet Ramsey case because they put out so many pieces of disinfo. They even had Lou Smith, one of the quote-unquote investigators in the case, going on national television saying that JonBenet Ramsey was strangled with a garrote, but she was also struck in the head. However, the head wound would not have been fatal. And then you have the actual reports from the forensic examiner which state directly to the contrary, that JonBenet's head wound would have been fatal. She was strangled, and that would have been the cause of death, but the head wound would have eventually killed her, and that's the subject of the episodes that I did last year. So the media is presenting the info in a particular way, and they aren't necessarily presenting it in a substantiated way where they can back up their claims. Or they'll also say some things such as, there was an intruder named Michael Helgoth, and his boot print was matched to the crime scene. That was mentioned on Aphrodite Jones, as well as at least one other documentary, I forget which one, but they stated that it was a match. But what they leave out is that there was a similar boot print found, owned by this guy named Michael Helgoth, but the boots were different sizes. Like, they take little pieces of the truth. It's the concept of taking bits and pieces of the truth and presenting that as everything. So they aren't exactly lying, they're just misrepresenting the information. And all of these theories that people have concocted, that JonBenet Ramsey wet the bed and her mother bashed her head against the bathtub faucet. Or how about the more famous example, that a suspect we haven't even talked about yet, Burke Ramsey. And he is going to perhaps have been vilified in the court of public opinion, mostly because of, again, the way the media chose to present the facts of the case. And CBS did a documentary pointing toward Burke Ramsey as a suspect in the murder of JonBenet, and he filed a $750 million lawsuit against them, accusing him of a crime that he had never been charged with. But I would like to get to Stephen Singular's book. The evening of January 9th, 1997 was bitter cold in Boulder, Colorado, with the temperature already below zero and headed down. The frozen earth snapped. When you stepped on it, the air gnawed at your cheeks. Breathing hurt your teeth. The people in Los Angeles tried to shoehorn the evidence to nail O.J. Simpson, and some of it just didn't fit. We're trying to do something different here. My hopes surged higher. Making mistakes is inevitable in law enforcement, but a far greater sin is the unwillingness to learn from the past. A man opened his pen, balancing a small tablet on his lap. "Tell us what you've been looking into," he said. And I also want to throw in some particular interjections about the conventional understanding of the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. Not only was she struck in the head with a blunt object on the top of her head, but as I said, a paintbrush was broken and then formed into a makeshift garrote, where that was placed around her neck, and then she was strangled or choked, whatever word you would like to use, with the garrote. And the head of the paintbrush was not recovered. That's why they think that it could have been used as, well, that's not the reason why they think it could have been used in the sexual assault. They have other reasons for that. But also, there was a ransom note that was left behind that used very odd language. It was 3 pages long, and it also stated that JonBenet had been kidnapped, and it was indeed a ransom note asking for $118,000 for the return of JonBenet Ramsey. But $118,000 was the equivalent of John Ramsey's bonus from his company. That's the father of JonBenet. So, was this not somebody who had inside familiarity with the family? And moreover, why write the ransom note if JonBenet had been murdered in the basement of her own home and not even moved to a different location? So, I mean, I can tell you some things flat out from talking about this in the past. I'm going to present this not as a cold hard fact, but one of my own ideas. I think the ransom note was purely a diversion. It's 3 pages long, and it was meant to distract the family to make sure that the killer or killers could get out of the house without anybody noticing. Other people disagree with me completely, and they think that it was written by Patsy Ramsey herself as a way to cover up for either her husband or her son, Burke, and it was just a bad attempt at a forgery, and forgery wouldn't even be the right word. A bad attempt at a fabrication, that's the right word to use. And then, as we're going to see in Stephen Singular's book, it's going to go beyond that and actually look at how these types of crimes took place elsewhere. And not only was JonBenet struck in the head, choked with the garrote, sexually assaulted with the paintbrush, but she was also tied and bound. And one thing that was pointed out in the Sweetie Bee documentary was that JonBenet had been tied up after she had been unconscious because the restraints went over the sleeve of the shirt that she was wearing, and if she had been struggling and fighting while she was conscious, it is expected that there would have either been marks of a struggle or that the restraints would have been pressed against her skin directly. But the first question to explore is, did similar crimes actually happen? And this is on page 25 of Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular. I began describing some pictures of young girls that I had recently seen on the internet. They were 5, 6, or 7 years old, and a few were older. They were naked and tied up, and were being sexually assaulted. They had ropes on their hands and tied around them, belts around their ankles, and wrists around their mouths. And about belts tied around their ankles and wrists, and their mouths were covered. The girls were laid out flat on metal tables or hanging right side up or upside down from the ceiling. Several of them looked foreign, but others were American. Their pictures were being sold or traded on the global underground market for CP in cyberspace. And you have to remember, this is 1996 and 1997. 97 when Stephen Singular is recanting these ideas. The internet was in its infancy, and some people have talked about this online that very clearly they thought that JonBenet's murder was filmed and it was videotaped on a camcorder, and the way that these CP operators, the people who are actually distributing these types of pornographic films, would work is that they would just go through the mail, the postal service, because it was a way to it was something that they did before the internet, and they can only use the internet for coded advertising or just letting people know that they have these disgusting videos that they want to sell to perverted customers, and that's what happens. Now, is that really true? Let's see. Nothing I'd seen or heard or read about the Ramsey case, I told Hunter and Wise, the men he was speaking to, had evoked the image of dead JonBenet, with a cord looped around her neck and another cord tied around her wrist. More than these internet photos of very small girls being abused for someone's amusement, Hunter had been staring at me intently and taking notes. The police, he now said cautiously, had looked into the CP early on, and CP just means something very bad involving children and imagery. I'm not saying the words because YouTube will take down this video. Taking as many as 180 videos from the Ramsey residence, but they found nothing linking JonBenet's father or anyone else in the family to this activity. They even subpoenaed John Ramsey's personal computer files, but came up empty. Have you looked for pornography connections outside of the family? I said. And I think that this is one subject that a lot of people would shy away from, even because they just simply don't want to discuss the horrific nature of it. We're not there yet, Hunter said. Our focus is still on the parents. Photographers, I said, repeating what some crime experts had been telling me. Photographers are always looking at youngsters, maybe rising stars, as actresses or models or beauty queens. These kids make up the pool that feed the growing appetite for CP. Nude pictures of little girls may be very valuable one day, if they eventually become famous. Everyone knows about beauty pageants, Hunter replied. But They told us that JonBenet definitely had the look, the classic southern blonde-haired, blue-eyed look that everyone wants. JonBenet Ramsey was already a winner on the pageant circuit, and she certainly had a future as a beauty queen, but you're telling us that there is a whole world attached to computerized CP, and I think that, firstly, that's most likely true. Now we have things like the dark web that people talk about, but there's also an individual that is involved with JonBenet's role as a beauty pageant queen, and that is her mother, Patsy Ramsey. Patsy Ramsey was a beauty queen herself and a former Miss West Virginia, although I hope she didn't tarnish the name of that great state. And with Patsy Ramsey, this is one thing that I do not fault her for. I know it is an unpopular opinion, but a lot of people think very poorly of Patsy Ramsey for introducing JonBenet to the pageant world, and I do not, because I think it is about her intention. And Patsy Ramsey had stage 4 cancer, and as I said, she was a former beauty queen and pageant winner, and I view this as just something that she wanted to share with her daughter before she passed away, just the thing that she had done with her life, and she wanted to allow JonBenet to experience it or to pass something on to her child. And that is simply that I view it. I'm trying to say that I don't believe Patsy Ramsey had an ounce of malicious intent by introducing JonBenet into the pageant world, but some facts do speak for themselves. When you look at photos of JonBenet Ramsey, very clearly she's a child, and you can tell that she's a child, but she looks like a child that has been posed as an adult, where she's making gestures and facial expressions, and even has her hair done in somewhat of a more mature way. And that gets a lot of people curious. It even gets me curious to the point where you begin to think there's just something awkward about viewing it for people who are outside the world of the dark web, where you can very clearly tell that someone is trying to make a little girl look much older. Back to the book. People trade and sell these images. While I was looking at some pictures, several men came online searching for risque photos of JonBenet. One was offering pictures of his own daughter for them. Absolutely despicable, horrible people in the world. That's very, very interesting, Hunter said. Well, I mean, he had a different reaction than I did. I knew this stuff was going on, but I didn't realize how much was out there. Did you see anyone using a garrote on the internet? I shook my head. That's Stephen Singular talking. Just ropes and belts and scarves. The scarves were tied over the mouth. Very interesting. High-tech people associated with law enforcement, cyber cops, as they called them, were going online and posing as kids willing to get involved with pedophiles. And I think that To Catch a Predator and Chris Hansen have done that on overdrive since the writing of this book. When the pedophiles made dates with youngsters at a given location, the police showed up and arrested them. Cyber cops, I told them, could essentially do the same thing with the child. CP, send it out and trade photos on the net while searching for illicit images of JonBenet and other girls. This is a very fertile investigation, I said, but it's difficult for a journalist to get close to. If I download CP, I'm committing a felony. And as you see, I'm trying my best not even to say the name because it's something that is so unbelievably horrible. But he's right. If he were to try and truly investigate this, he would break the law himself, and there would be no way to play it off as a cover story. You don't want to do that, Hunter said, but it's also tricky for the government to investigate this sort of thing. You can just imagine what my friends in the media would do if they heard about us sending out CP pictures. They would go crazy. Oh boy. Wise chuckled. Again, what's so funny about that? Weirdos. Somebody knocked on the DA's door. Yes, Hunter called out. A middle-aged woman stepped inside and apologized for interrupting our meeting. She said that the DA's 11-year-old daughter had just called, but it wasn't urgent for him to phone back. Okay, now we're going to hear some things from the actual day that JonBenet was murdered, or at the very least, the time when the family is learning about her disappearance. But my immediate response to reading this stuff that I've just shared with you is that Stephen Singular's claim, which he said on Borken's Policy Radio, was that there were multiple children whom had been tied up in a very similar way to JonBenet, but the description that had been provided of the girls that had been found in this sex ring that had been busted were rather different. I mean, the description was rather different, talking about using belts to secure their legs and tying scarves over their mouths. I don't recall those exact details from the JonBenet case, and yes, her arms were bound, and they even asked a very good question. Well, were any of the pictures on the internet of a girl who had been choked with a garrote or a child being choked with a garrote? And the answer seems to be just inconclusive, saying it's possible, but no. So that is a strike against any type of this particular theory, but still approaching with an open mind. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996, Patsy Ramsey dialed 911 and reported finding a rambling 2.5-page ransom note torn from a legal pad at the bottom of the staircase in her Boulder home. The note said that her daughter JonBenet had been kidnapped by a small foreign faction. Those holding her were demanding $118,000 to be exchanged for the girl later that day. If the money was not delivered, the child would be beheaded. 7 minutes after Patsy made the call, the police arrived at her 15-room, 6,800 square foot residence in the upscale Chautauqua neighborhood of Boulder. John Ramsey phoned Fleet White, a local oil man, and some other friends. White owned a business, Fleet Oil, which he ran from his Boulder home. The night before, which was Christmas, the Ramseys had driven a few blocks to the Whites. A small family gathering took place, and other guests were also invited. It was festive. Around 9:30 p.m., the Ramseys had returned to their house, apparently intending to go to bed early, because at dawn they had plans to fly to their second home in Michigan. Fleet White and John Ramsey had an intense personal relationship that some people said included jealousy. Like Ramsey, White was a successful businessman. He was married, and he also had a 6-year-old daughter named Daphne, who was the same age as JonBenet. But the Ramseys had an aura of glamour that Fleet and Priscilla White did not have. In 1978, Patsy Ramsey had been crowned Miss West Virginia and then competed for the Miss America title in Atlantic City. She was outgoing and charming and did charity work for some of Boulder's most prestigious philanthropic organizations. In the past year, she'd gone through a life-and-death battle with ovarian cancer, but after chemotherapy and other healing treatments, including large doses of prayer, she was now winning the struggle. By age 6, JonBenet had already become a child beauty queen herself, holding titles such as Little Miss Colorado, Little Miss Charlevoix, and America's Royal Little Miss, as well as the Colorado All-Star Kids cover girl. JonBenet ran the highly profitable, JonBenet, excuse me, I misread that. John Ramsey, that's the father, ran the highly profitable Access Graphics and had been voted Boulder's 1995 Entrepreneur of the Year. In the 12 months just ending, Access Graphics had broken the billion-dollar sales mark for the first time, and the 53-year-old Ramsey had celebrated his triumph by pouring champagne for several hundred employees at a holiday office party. Between John's accumulation of wealth, corporate power, and Patsy's cancer recovery, as well as their daughter's growing reputation on the child pageant circuit, the Ramseys had a great year, until right now. And you notice one person that is left out of this, and that is Burke Ramsey. And some people believe that JonBenet was overshadowing Burke, and that there's a very famous story out there, but I will recap it and say that Burke Ramsey was jealous of JonBenet, and he killed her over a piece of pineapple. And to elaborate on that, pineapple was found in JonBenet's small intestine, and there was not exactly undigested pineapple, but the mucus that's left behind from, or the stomach contents, also showed that she had recently eaten pineapple before she died. And some people believe that JonBenet and Burke were sitting in the kitchen, and Burke was eating pineapple that had been covered in milk. I guess that's something that they ate in their family. And JonBenet grabbed a piece of pineapple out of Burke's bowl, and he had been dealing with so much negative energy towards JonBenet for so long, always living in her shadow, always being jealous of her, and that he just lost it, and he grabbed a blunt object and struck her in the head with it, struck her on the top of the head to be precise, and then JonBenet just fell to the ground, and then Burke grabbed a piece of his toy train set and then stabbed JonBenet in the side, because at first he's just trying to shake her a little bit to get her to wake up, and then he actually poked her with the train track to just see if she would respond to some type of external stimuli, but of course she did not. And then he begins to panic, and that's why people think that Burke Ramsey could have been the perpetrator, and that train track mark was the very famous stun gun mark, because to the credit of the CBS investigators that showed that JonBenet, they showed that JonBenet most likely was not attacked with a stun gun, contrary to popular belief, for two reasons. Number one, a stun gun actually makes a large amount of noise that would have been heard by the parents, and number two, that the stun gun would leave very large pink markings on the body, which JonBenet did not have. That's why people were suggesting that it was actually a piece of Burke Ramsey's toy train set. Now, there could be explanations throughout that. And as you see, the direction of this book is not going to go anywhere near that. It's talking about how there's this group of pedophiles that are targeting JonBenet for pornographic reasons. But I did just want to point out that, listing all the accomplishments of the Ramsey family, Burke is left out of this. Shortly after receiving Ramsey's call at dawn on December 26, 1996, Fleet White arrived at his friend's home, which was soon crowded with police officers. More family acquaintances with the Ramseys' minister, the Reverend Roll Haverstock of St. John's Episcopal Church, also took place. When the police saw the ransom note, they assumed that JonBenet had in fact been kidnapped and been taken from her home. That's why I was stating that I thought the ransom note was a diversion, because how else would they know anything to the contrary? They're not going to search the basement for JonBenet because they think that she's been abducted and taken outside of the house, and the killer or attempted abductor could guarantee that she was dead and they could get a clean getaway. Because of this, they did not empty the house of civilians and search it thoroughly. Exactly. Instead, they casually questioned the Ramseys and set about preparing to tap the phones in order to trace the expected ransom call. One of the officers, Linda Arndt, the first detective to arrive at the residence, devoted part of her morning to calming down Patsy, who was weeping uncontrollably. Several hours passed while the police obtained a search warrant for the house and waited for the ransom call, which never came. At a few minutes past 1 p.m., John Ramsey decided to look through the residence with himself with Fleet White accompanying him, and they headed straight down to the basement. Ramsey lodged a door open to the small wine cellar, and there on the floor, with duct tape spread across her lips and white cord tied around her neck and wrists, lay the strangled JonBenet Ramsey with a bashed skull. Her father screamed, bent over, and ripped the tape from her mouth, lifted her up into his arms, and carried her upstairs, placing the corpse near the Christmas tree, and in the process tampering with the crime scene by preventing any pristine forensic investigation of it. And even in some accounts you can read that it was actually Detective Linda Arndt who gave John Ramsey permission to cover JonBenet with a white blanket as a sign of memorial of respect for the dead, but in doing so completely contaminated any possibility of searching for evidence. But this goes right back to the same issue, though. JonBenet is found with duct tape spread across her lips, white cord tied around her neck and wrists. That is not at all what Stephen Singular has said the girls from the busted sex ring were like. Belts tied around their legs or feet, really around the ankles, and scarves tied around the mouth. That is something that I just want to point out is once again different. When Patsy saw the body, she became hysterical and began praying and screaming and asking God to raise her daughter from the dead, as he had done with Lazarus. The Ramseys' friends looked on in horror. In life, the 45-pound JonBenet had been outfitted in lavish sequined outfits and adorned with full makeup so that she could enter and win beauty contests. Her cosmetics, elaborately teased hair, and pageant clothes, costing well into the thousands of dollars, had given her the disturbing appearance of an exotic doll that featured a woman's face and a seductive on-stage movement in a child's body. She looked extremely knowing for her age and not quite real. Lying dead by the Christmas tree, she evoked the image of a discarded and battered toy. So, this is one point, though, that I almost have to deviate from the book discussion angle and move toward book review mode. And I don't do a lot of book reviews on this channel, or in fact, I've never done a pure book review, because then you have to talk about aspects of the language, and this would be an example of how a book review is different than a book discussion. A book discussion, I'm pulling out some ideas that Stephen Singular has written, and I'm talking about them. In a book review, I would say, this is a very odd way to insert these sentences into this particular paragraph, because it doesn't fit with the flow of it at all. For example, he's talking about how JonBenet was found. She is dead. She weighed 45 pounds. And then, immediately, he's talking about all of these vivid descriptions of what she looked like during the beauty pageants, and even saying that she had an exotic look, seductive on-stage movements in a child's body, and then lying dead by the Christmas tree, she looked like a discarded and battered toy. I think that that is a very, very bizarre and borderline inappropriate way to splice together two ideas that don't belong together. So that's another strike against this early section of the book. And 5 days later, on December 31st, scores of mourners filed into suburban Atlanta's Peachtree Presbyterian Church for JonBenet's funeral service. The sanctuary was decorated with poinsettias, and sunlight shot through the stained-glass windows. Before the service began, grieving friends and family members lingered over the small casket, kissing JonBenet's cheeks and stroking her blonde hair. Then Reverend W. Frank Harrington, who had baptized the girl and married her parents 16 years earlier, stood and addressed the congregation. The mind cannot accept and the heart refuses to grasp the death of one so young, who is suddenly taken from us by cruelty and malice by some unworthy person. When a child is lost, one feels that part of the future is gone. The Ramseys sat in the front row, with John rubbing his wife's back, and young Burke, JonBenet's 9-year-old brother, restlessly kicking back his feet back and forth under the pew. Reverend Harrington read a song from Gypsy, the victim's favorite musical, and led everybody in. Jesus Loves Me, This I Know, whose childlike lyrics and simple melody caused sobs to reverberate throughout the church. When the service was over, Patsy walked up to the coffin and lowered her veiled face, and she placed her arms around the casket, holding it and swaying, until her husband slowly led her away. JonBenet was taken to a cemetery near the St. James Episcopal Church, her grave shadowed by a dogwood tree, and she was buried wearing a pageant dress and the tiny crown she had received for winning Colorado's Little Miss Christmas contest. As these events unfolding in Atlanta, half a continent away in Boulder, were dropping off stuffed animals and other toys in front of the Ramsey home, they had tied ribbons on the holiday candy canes that aligned the sidewalk and erected a cross on the lawn. A message scrawled across it read that mourners would see a girl in heaven. The day after the funeral, on January 1st, 1997, John and Patsy appeared on the CNN cable TV network and proclaimed their innocence to a captivated nationwide audience, while offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of JonBenet's killer. And that is where we're going to have to leave it for this particular episode, and we're going to be picking up at this page next week and going through more stories of JonBenet and seeing about how the Ramseys will be vilified in the court of public opinion, particularly Patsy Ramsey. But so far, what are you thinking about Stephen Singular's exact theory? And I think that this is an example of a stone that can be unturned, exploring the path less traveled by, and just looking in a place that a few people might be afraid to look in. However, on the other hand, this is not a storytelling contest, and it's not something that where a person can just whip up the most horrific answer possible and that person's the winner of the contest. No, there is a real answer as to why somebody murdered JonBenet. Who did it? How did they do it? When did they do it? And why? All those questions truly exist. And that is why I think a lot of us turn to the true crime world, because we want answers, and we don't just want ramblings. And so far, not to say anything harsh to about Stephen singular, but all I'm seeing are a set of ramblings in his book about how, yes, CP exists, children are photographed and shared online, but the supporting pieces of evidence have not been revealed yet. But this is only the early part of the book, and going through a few dozen pages so far, maybe there will be more to encounter in part 2. Thank you so much for listening to this episode again. And anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.